Madrid, 1834. In the palace hush, the royal physician completes a strange assignment. The king is dead, yet the work is not over. Maria Cristina stands nearby, already a widow and regent, and asks that a long whispered secret remain hidden. The physician understands that he is not only facing a body, he is facing a symbol of power that pushed the country along a crooked road, like a player laying a shaky bridge of random blocks over lava, where each step could bring the span down. To understand Ferdinand VII, the clock must turn back. For centuries, the Spanish royal houses arranged marriages within the family tree tangled until branches braided into themselves. In October of 1784, at El Escorial, a child was born who inherited a heavy burden. His father, Charles IV, preferred hunting to councils. His mother, Maria Luisa, was forceful and dazzling. The court glowed with gold, yet under the gilding ran cracks, like an old fortress that looks fine until the carpenter taps the beams. As the heir grew, a private condition emerged, known to doctors and suspected by servants. For the young prince, it became a steady source of shame. People whispered, people smirked, and he learned to answer humiliation with authority. Where others would set a torch and move on, he built walls and sealed trapdoors. Distrust turned into habit. Any awkward moment became a reason to punish. In that way, a character took shape in which injury and suspicion crowded out trust. Tutors saw that the prince chose reprisal over lesson. Servants knew mistakes were not allowed. A careless glance could break a family's future. All this trained a future monarch who would guard a secret at any cost. In public, he could be polite, but inside anger collected. In a world where respect is earned by deeds, he became used to extracting it through fear. In 1802, he married Maria Antonia. The celebrations were grand, the streets cheered, the music rolled through the city. Behind the facade, however, unusual preparations began. Cushions and oils were carried into the palace. Physicians discussed details. The wedding night became a procedure. Where others needed only tenderness, this couple needed a scheme and an instruction sheet. The young queen grew afraid, the prince grew harder, and their world came to resemble a mechanism assembled with the wrong pieces, creaking at every motion and ready to snap. Long months of scheduled attempts followed. Everything occurred according to one plan. Doctors waited outside the door, the queen startled at the smallest sound, and the prince fell into silence. Sometimes hope appeared, then faded. Maria Antonia weakened and asked for remedies more often, not for festivity, but for fear and pain. In 1807, she died. The official words were mild and cautious, yet the corridors held heavier talk. People spoke of hidden notes and missing records. No one wished to say anything aloud, but every shadow reminded the court of a secret that was consuming it from within. Meanwhile, discontent grew in the country. Charles IV seemed weak, and the favorite Godoy inspired hatred. Around Ferdinand gathered people hungry for change. They called him the Desired and painted a portrait of a savior. Yet the man on whom they placed their bet had learned to save only himself. When the El Escorial conspiracy broke open in 1807, the prince surrendered his allies and begged his parents for pardon. He named names, shifted blame, and kept his own skin intact. Thus he strengthened a habit of using and discarding, like items dropped from a crowded inventory. In 1808, Napoleon intervened. Spain shook and groaned. Ferdinand was carried off to France, and the country sank into fire. In captivity, doctors studied his health. He wrote to European courts and thought about a new marriage. He believed that the proper bride would solve the main quest. Spain at that moment felt like a storm-beaten server. Bridges fell, lines of communication broke, and cities held out only through the bravery of local militias. Yet in Ferdinand's mind, the same goal kept circling. An heir was necessary, and so the attempts must continue. In 1814, he returned. The people wept with joy, the streets were crowned with flowers, and bells rang. The celebration ended quickly. Ferdinand overturned the liberal constitution and restored old controls. A dark decade began. Government became the mirror of his inner world. Suspicions, denunciations, prisons. He built the state as a personal bastion. In every office he looked for an enemy, and behind every door he put a watcher. Energy that might have gone to reform was spent on surveillance and fear. During those years, he married again. Maria Isabella of Portugal arrived in 1816. The young queen carried hopeful dreams into Madrid, and the palace repeated its strange preparations. The night after the wedding became a shock that marked her health and spirit. From that moment, her strength fell away. She grew timid, lost sleep, and hesitated when speaking. Ferdinand took her fear as an insult. He tightened control, intercepted letters, ordered food to be tested, and placed guards in the corridors. The court became a maze of suspicion. Every step creaked, every corner seemed dangerous. Across the ocean, the colonies moved away. Mexico, New Granada, Argentina, Chile, Peru, and others slipped from imperial hands. The river of bullion dried up. Trade shrank, the budget cracked, and the roads swarmed with bandits. European papers mocked the fallen empire. The capital trimmed costs, while the palace still spent on guards and rituals. The country needed leadership and relief. It received suspicion and paperwork. In 1819, Ferdinand married a third time. Maria Josefa Amalia of Saxony arrived fully briefed. She had her own physician, a list of measures, and a careful regimen. Her approach was cool and exact. She kept a journal, placed marks in the margins, and followed a schedule. To the state, this looked odd. Councils waited for decisions, and ministers waited for signatures, but the monarch postponed meetings. On the agenda stood household matters again. Public business congealed like water before frost. Warehouses stood empty, and the quays received fewer ships. By the end of the 20s, the court had resigned itself to failure. Everyone felt weary, yet no one dared to speak clearly. The private drama of the monarch seemed to hold the whole nation's hands behind its back. Then, in 1829, hope returned. The palace whispered about a birth to come. Corridors held cautious smiles. Europe listened. Some spoke of providence, some spoke of medicine, some murmured gossip in inn-yards and chancelleries. For Spain, it looked like a chance to slow the fall. For Ferdinand, it looked like proof that a long and punishing road had finally led to a goal. The rush began at once. Physicians and remedies were summoned. Prayers were said, arguments held, and orders issued. The king interfered with every detail, insisting that events should follow his plan. Nature does not obey commands. The pregnancy turned complicated. In a single day, the hope collapsed. A daughter lived only a few hours, and the queen soon followed her. The palace fell into a ringing silence. People walked on tiptoe. The king refused to accept reality. He told his staff to continue and waited for a miracle. No miracle came. At last he lowered his hands. A pause followed, long and heavy, and the court sank into quiet. In those months, Ferdinand drew inward. He ignored state business, declined audiences, and sat alone for long hours. Death masks of the departed queens lay on a table. Nearby stood useless devices that had promised solutions and a stack of papers without the royal signature. Spain continued to slide. Ships arrived with little to trade. Storehouses emptied, and the treasury thinned. Rebellions flickered in the provinces. Writers abroad described a nation exhausted. On the throne still sat a man who saw the world through a private wound. His shadow stretched over the entire royal household. So ends the first part of this story. We see a boy with a heavy inheritance, a prince who hid weakness and learned to retaliate, a captive who thought more about marriage than about his country, and a king who returned with fear instead of order. We see weddings and mourning, cold offices and hollow promises, unpatched roads and unanswered letters. We see a Spain that tries to climb out of a mine shaft, yet the ladder keeps breaking. Ahead waits a new chapter, another wife, an argument over succession, a struggle to hold the throne, and a reckoning with the price of power. The year 1829 brought what many had called impossible. Maria Josefa became pregnant, and the court held its breath. Europe watched in a hush. Some spoke of providence, others trusted science, and a few traded whispers in back rooms. Ferdinand poured all his energy into control. He summoned physicians, arranged prayers, revised routines, and tried to force calm by command. Nature does not answer to orders. Complications rose, hope fell, and grief settled over Madrid. A daughter lived for only a short time, and the queen followed her. Silence filled the palace, footsteps softened, lamps burned lower. For a while the monarch turned from state papers and sat among masks, ledgers, and devices that had promised answers and delivered only noise. What followed was a palace built on surveillance. Secret doors multiplied. Corridors gained hidden turns. Food tasters waited in measured intervals. Servants learned to speak softly and to step exactly on the rugs where the floorboards did not complain. Every letter was suspect. Every visit needed a record. Maria Cristina worked to keep a calm routine, to smile in public, to manage the papers and the patient visits and the measured walks with her child. Even so, the pressure left marks. A hand paused at a latch. A glance checked a mirror. Sleep ran thin. Beyond the palace, the country pressed forward and fell back, like a cart on a hill of loose gravel. The treasury was light. The roads were rough. Gangs prowled the countryside. Merchants lost cargoes and gained excuses. Ministers tried to repair ports and canals, but the crown always had another guard to pay, another hallway to seal, another file to review before the ink dried. Spain needed bridges and markets. It received barricades and watchers. The colonies were already gone, and with them the easy river of metal that had masked weak structure for a century. Now the frame showed. Now every crack mattered. Ferdinand grew older, and his health failed in familiar ways. Sleeplessness, aches, a tremor in the hand that should have signed relief into law. His briefings became long and circular, names blurred, warnings multiplied. He tested ministers with contradictions and judged them by the speed of their corrections. Counselors learned to nod slowly and to answer with care. The government turned into a theater of balance, where each sentence needed two meanings, one for the room and one for the hallway outside. The king feared poison, so he waited. He feared plots, so he listened. He feared silence, so he ordered reports. Spies trailed whispers and wrote pages filled with guesses that hardened into facts once they reached the desk at the end of the chain. The palace functioned like a redstone circuit with too many repeaters, signals arriving late and flickering out just when they mattered. Decisions stalled. Projects drifted. The map of Spain looked the same, yet towns felt smaller and distances longer. Maria Cristina carried a different burden. She had to anchor court life, protect her daughter, and keep faith with a country that wanted a future more than a spectacle. She practiced patience. She trimmed ceremonies. She chose her words so that hope had room to live. When letters went out, she knew they might be opened elsewhere, so she wrote as if every line would be read aloud. A queen in such a house learned to act on stage every day. She was careful with time in the chapel and time in the nursery. She found counsel in plain tasks, a needle, a book, a walk across a sunlit gallery that belonged to no faction and no rumor. By 1832, the strain showed everywhere. Guard rotations changed often. Courtiers exchanged the same greetings with different meanings. The king looked at his daughter and tried to read a future in her features. He commissioned portraits and compared them to old canvases as if a brush could verify blood. Genealogists arrived with charts that could be read two ways, just enough comfort to pass the afternoon, not enough certainty to change a law. Faith and fear stood together in the same room and refused to leave first. In 1833, the long unraveling reached its end. The body that had carried so much tension finally gave way. Physicians wrote a careful cause on the page. Those who had watched him for years spoke more plainly in private. Exhaustion ruled him, mind and flesh, and that exhaustion moved through the whole machine of the state. He died, and with his passing the air changed. People stepped a little faster, as if a draft had opened a door that had been stuck for a very long time. His death did not settle the country. It only moved the fight from shadow to daylight. Isabella was named, and the law bent to seat her. Yet another claimant gathered banners and men. Don Carlos spoke for a stricter order. His partisans called for a return to something they named pure, and proved hard. Those who supported Isabella rallied to defend a future that might adapt. The line between them ran through villages, regiments, and families. Spain entered another season of struggle, not of conquest, but of definition. What was a crown for? Who could claim it? What duties came with it? These questions did not fit into a single decree. Maria Cristina stepped into the space that opened. Regent for her daughter, she had to show that the throne could serve a country that had outgrown old reflexes. She moved between generals and jurists. She bargained with cities and provinces. She tried to place the next stone in the wall without collapsing the foundation. For every success, there was a setback. For every peace, there was a rumor. Yet the work continued, one measured choice at a time. If the earlier years had been a lesson in how private fear can distort public life, the new years tried to teach the opposite lesson. Private courage could steady public tasks. Patience could replace panic. Records could replace rumors. Roads could be built again. Schools could open. Courts could rule on issues larger than the intrigues of a palace. Each of these tasks was small by itself. Together they could sketch a path out of the mine where the ladder had broken so often. The memory of Ferdinand remained, not as triumph, but as warning. Power without inner balance multiplies errors. Suspicion used as a compass leads in circles. A court that watches itself more than it watches the harvest cannot feed a nation. The story became a map of pitfalls to avoid. Do not confuse control with care. Do not replace repair with ritual. Do not let a private wound set the agenda for a public house. Isabella grew, and with her grew the chance to reframe the pattern. She represented a line that could continue without the heavy mask of the past. Her presence gave ministers an anchor and gave cities a reason to plan more than a season ahead. The fights did not end. They rarely do. Yet the center of gravity shifted a little. Less drama, more duty, fewer alarms, more work. That shift did not make headlines. It made roads and contracts and timid merchants bold enough to send another ship. In the end, the tale returns to the first room, the quiet one. A physician finishes his work. A widow signs a paper. A child sleeps, while a map on the wall shows a country that has been bruised and yet remains whole. The lesson does not shine. It holds. Power must serve a scale larger than a single life. Secrets must shrink until facts can breathe. A crown must weigh less than the needs of the people who look up when a bell rings. If Spain could remember that, then the next chapter would not need a hero or a spectacle. It would need only steadiness, daylight, and the courage to build again, block by block, until the structure stands on its own.